The Christmas bazaar snow had turned to gray slush by noon, each boot print filling with ice water. Wind came down Main Street sharp enough to skin a man, carrying the smell of wet wool and wood smoke from stoves that couldn't quite keep the cold out. Marjorie Colton's fingers had gone numb, arranging bonnets on the crooked table. The nail caught her hem as she turned, one of those bent spikes jutting from ice-damaged boards. Fabric tore hip to knee with a sound like a rifle crack. The world stopped. Beneath the torn dress, blue cavalry wool showed clear. A man's coat, her dead husband's jacket, the only warmth she owned. Whispers spread fast as frostbite. The mayor's wife smiled like a cat with a cornered mouse. 200 people watched dignity bleed out into snow. Marjorie stood shaking, blue-fingered, wanting to disappear into white nothing. Then a voice spoke, low, steady, kind enough to stop her heart. "Ma'am." The booth had cost Marjorie her last $3. Just pine boards and borrowed nails, but it was hers. She'd sewn every bonnet by lamplight in a cabin so cold she could see her breath indoors. The stitches were good, tight, honest work. Her fingers had been too numb last night to make them perfect. Beatrice Harland arrived at 11:30 in black silk that probably cost more than Marjorie's entire year. She moved through the bazaar like a queen inspecting peasants, gloved hand touching merchandise with assessment that found fault before looking. "Mrs. Colton." Beatrice lifted one of the bonnets. Her smile never reached her eyes. "How industrious of you to participate." "Yes, ma'am." Marjorie kept her voice steady. "I hope to contribute." "Of course." Beatrice turned the bonnet over. "Though the stitching seems irregular. Rushed, perhaps?" She set it down with exaggerated care. "I do hope standards haven't slipped simply because we're being charitable." The word charitable hit like a slap. Around them, other women paused, ears sharpening. Someone's teacup clinked against a saucer, the sound too loud and sudden quiet. "The work is sound," Marjorie said. "Each piece—" "I'm sure you did your best, dear." Beatrice's tone could freeze water. "We all work within our limitations." Her gaze traveled to Marjorie's thin coat, a man's coat, poorly hidden beneath her shawl. "Some more than others." She swept away, left Marjorie standing with cold creeping up from her feet and shame burning in her chest. Nearby women whispered behind gloved hands. One laughed, bright and cruel. Marjorie's fingers found the torn seam in her pocket, the one she hadn't mended because she'd been sewing for others, trying to earn firewood money before deep cold came. 3 weeks until January. 3 weeks to make enough to survive. The bent nail waited 2 feet away, ice buckled and jutting. She didn't see it. Silas Brennan stood near the blacksmith's stall holding his daughter's hand, watching the bazaar with careful attention. He'd come for nails and lamp oil, not festivities, but Ruth had begged to see decorations, and he'd never been good at telling her no. "Papa," Ruth said, "why's that fancy lady being mean?" He followed her gaze to where Beatrice held court, voice carrying across the square. Near her, a younger woman stood behind a modest booth, shoulders drawn tight against more than cold. "Because some folks measure themselves by making others feel small," Silas said quietly. "But why?" "Because they're afraid. Afraid if they don't push someone down, people might notice they're not standing as tall as they pretend." Ruth considered this with 8-year-old seriousness. Mama wouldn't have been mean like that. No. His chest tightened the way it always did when Ruth mentioned Martha. She wouldn't have. They watched the seamstress, Mrs. Colton, he thought her name was, carefully rearrange her display. Her hands shook, not just from cold. She wore a man's coat under her dress, the kind soldiers came home in, or didn't come home in. "She's real thin," Ruth observed. "Is she poor?" "Reckon so." "Are we going to help her?" Silas looked down at his daughter, those eyes that still saw the world as a place where help was possible. Martha's eyes. "Not our business, Ruth." But even saying it, he felt the lie settle uncomfortable in his gut. He'd learned in the war that turning away from suffering didn't make it disappear, just meant you had to live with knowing you'd chosen comfort over conscience. Ruth tugged his sleeve again, urgent now. "Papa, that lady, she looks like Mama did before she got real sick, all pale and shaky." He looked closer. She was right, that particular thinness from missing too many meals. The way she held herself like standing upright took all her strength, the desperate hope in how she'd arranged her work. "Come on," he said, starting to move toward the booth. The fabric tore with a sound like bones breaking. Marjorie's heel had caught the nail. The seam split hip to knee, Beneath it, exposed to 200 staring eyes, blue cavalry wool showed unmistakable. For one crystalline moment, silence held the square, then whispers started, spreading like fire in dry grass. Is that a man's coat? She's wearing trousers underneath. Improper! Marjorie's hands flew to clutch torn fabric. Too much to cover. The coat was visible, unmistakable, wrong in every way that mattered to people who measured morality by hemlines. Her basket tipped, bonnets spilled into slush. She bent to gather them, but her hands shook too violently. No one helped. Cold hit her exposed leg like a physical blow. She started shivering, violent tremors that made her teeth chatter. The smell of wet wool and her own fear rose sharp in winter air. A man near the back laughed, then another. Then a woman's high, cruel giggle that cut through everything else. Silas felt Ruth's hand tighten in his, felt something in his chest crack open, not breaking but thawing. Well, Beatrice Harlan stepped forward, her face arranged in theatrical concern. Mrs. Colton, I had no idea you were in such reduced circumstances. Her eyes traveled deliberately from torn dress to cavalry coat to Marjorie's face. The sound of her silk skirts rustling was loud in the sudden hush. A man's military jacket. How did you come by it? It was my husband's. Marjorie's voice came through chattering teeth. Was it? Beatrice's tone suggested disbelief. And you wear it underneath your dress? Like some kind of... She trailed off. Let the crowd fill in the blank. Vagrant, someone muttered. Confidence woman, said another. Marjorie tried to speak, to explain she had no other warm clothes, that the coat was all she had left of Thomas, that she wasn't trying to deceive anyone, but her voice caught in her throat and came out as a broken gasp. Around her, the Christmas bazaar had transformed into a courtroom. She'd already been found guilty. The cold worked deeper into her bones. Her lips felt thick, numb. When she touched her face, her fingers came away wet. Tears or melted snow, she couldn't tell. I think, Beatrice said slowly, words carrying to every ear, we should discuss whether Mrs. Colton's situation makes her suitable for participation in our community festival. After all, we have standards. Marjorie's vision blurred. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Wanted to disappear, but 200 eyes held her pinned. Someone shouted from the back, "She's wearing a dead man's coat like a thief!" Beatrice's smile turned sharp as broken glass. The smell of roasting chestnuts from a nearby cart turned Marjorie's stomach. Or maybe that was fear. She couldn't tell anymore where cold ended and shame began. The voice came from beyond the ring of watchers, cutting through laughter like an axe through winter wood. Ma'am. The crowd parted. Silas Brennan walked through the gap with the kind of calm that made noise feel obscene. Tall, broad-shouldered, frost in his beard and snow on his boots. His face carried that weathered look of someone who'd survived things that would have broken softer men. He didn't look at the tear in her dress. He looked at her eyes. Marjorie stood frozen, unable to comprehend why this stranger was approaching when everyone else had stepped back. His boots crunched through slush, each step deliberate, unhurried. Silas reached up and undid the buttons of his own coat, the heavy sheepskin one that had kept him alive through worse winters than this. He shrugged it off his shoulders. Cold hit him immediately, but his hands didn't shake as he stepped close and draped the coat around Marjorie like it was the most natural thing in the world. It swallowed her. The hem fell past her knees, covering the torn dress entirely. The sheepskin was warm from his body, smelled like cedar smoke and honest work. She looked up at him, stunned. He fastened the top button with careful work-roughened fingers. "Dignity's still yours," he said, quiet but loud enough for the nearest watchers to hear. Then raising his voice so it carried, "Winter takes a lot of things from folks, but it don't take that. Not unless we let it." The laughter died. The whispers stopped. The crowd stood in sudden, uncomfortable silence. Because Silas Brennan was a man people respected. War veteran, rancher, someone who paid his debts and kept his word, and he'd just publicly chosen a side. Marjorie's mouth opened, but no words came. Tears spilled hot down frozen cheeks. "Ruth," Silas called, and his daughter appeared at his elbow, solemn and wide-eyed. "Help Mrs. Colton gather her things." Ruth knelt immediately, picked bonnets from slush with gentle 8-year-old hands. The sound of fabric squelching against wet snow seemed loud in the quiet. Beatrice Harlan stepped forward, her face tight with barely controlled fury. "Mr. Brennan." Her voice was honey-sweet, which made it more dangerous. "I hope you realize what you're doing. This town has a long memory. And associations can affect one's reputation. She paused. Your daughter's reputation. Silas turned to face her. Something in his expression made Beatrice take a half step back. Ma'am, he said, and the word was colder than the wind. My daughter's learning right now that there's two kinds of people in this world. Those who step up when someone's down, and those who kick harder. I know which one I want her to be. He picked up Marjorie's basket, full of muddy bonnets Ruth had rescued, and offered his arm to Marjorie. Can you walk? She nodded, not trusting her voice. They left the bazaar together, Silas, Marjorie wrapped in his coat, and Ruth. 200 people watched in silence. The December wind erased their footprints in the snow almost as fast as they made them. Behind them, Beatrice stood alone in the empty space they'd left. Her breath came quick and visible. Her gloved hands clenched into fists. She'd just lost the first battle. And Beatrice Harlan never lost battles without winning the war. They didn't speak as they walked. Silas leading, Ruth between them, Marjorie stumbling in boots that let in water. The coat made her feel both protected and exposed. Streets emptied as they passed, people suddenly remembering errands that took them the other direction. The sound of their footsteps was loud, crunch of snow, squelch of hidden slush. Ruth's small breaths puffing white. Where do you live? Silas asked finally. End of Creek Road, the small cabin. He knew the one. Abandoned for 2 years before someone, her, apparently, had moved in last fall. No one had thought to mention a new neighbor, or maybe they had, and he'd been too buried in grief to listen. The cabin looked worse up close. One window stuffed with rags where a pane had broken, roof sagging on the left side, no smoke came from the chimney, which in December meant, How long's your firewood been out? He asked. 3 days, her voice was barely audible. I was hoping to earn enough at the bazaar to buy more before the real cold hits. The real cold, as if 20 degrees wasn't real enough. Ruth pushed open the cabin door. It stuck, swollen with moisture, and they stepped into cold almost as bitter as outside. Silas's eyes adjusted to dimness. One room, a cot with blankets thin enough to see through, a table with one wobbly leg, a wood box empty, a single candle burned to a nub. The smell hit him, not decay, but absence. No cooking smells, no warmth, no life. Just cold wood and desperate hope. This wasn't poverty. This was the edge of death, dressed up to look like living. Jesus, he breathed. Marjorie moved past him quickly, suddenly defensive. It's not much, but it's mine. I'll manage. I always manage. She started to shrug off his coat. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Brennan, but I can't accept— Stop. He held up a hand. You're keeping that coat till you're warm again. Could be spring before that happens. The look of things. I can't take your— Ain't taking. I'm lending. There's a difference. Ruth had wandered to the corner where 3 bonnets hung on pegs. Pretty ones. The ones Marjorie hadn't taken to sell because they were too fine, too much herself in them. These are real pretty, Ruth said softly. You made them? Yes. They're better than the ones at the bazaar. Prettier stitches. Something in Marjorie's face cracked, just a little. Thank you, sweetheart. Silas was examining the chimney. Knocked against the flue pipe, heard the hollow echo of blockage. Flue's clogged. That's why you got no draw. I can fix that, and I'll send my foreman by with firewood this afternoon. Mr. Brennan, I don't have money to— Didn't ask for money. Then I can't accept charity. He turned to face her, his voice gentled. Ma'am, I'm going to say this once. Accepting help ain't the same as accepting charity. Charity's what people give to feel better about themselves. Helps what neighbors do because it's right. You let me know which one you think I'm offering. She stared at him, pride warring with desperation. Pride was losing, but it was a near thing. Why are you doing this? She whispered. He glanced at Ruth, who was examining the bonnets with serious concentration, then back to Marjorie. Because my wife died 8 winters ago, and I wasn't there to help her. Been carrying that around like a stone in my chest ever since. Maybe I can't fix what's past, but I can sure as hell make sure another woman don't freeze while I'm standing by with the means to stop it. The words hung in the cold air between them, truth stark as bare branches against winter's sky. Silas returned 2 hours later with a wagon full of firewood and a burlap sack that smelled like fresh bread. Ruth sat beside him on the bench, bundled in her mother's old shawl, insisting she wanted to help. Marjorie heard them coming. The jingle of harness, the creak of wagon wheels on frozen ground. She opened the door, still wearing his coat because the cabin had stayed cold despite her best efforts to warm it with her own breath. "Told you I'd send firewood," Silas said, climbing down. "Decided to bring it myself. Ruth wanted to come." "I brought soup." Ruth held up a jar carefully. The glass caught weak afternoon light. "Papa made it this morning. It's got real beef." And Marjorie's throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "Ruth, help Mrs. Colton get that fire started proper," Silas interrupted, already unloading wood. "I'm going to fix that chimney." For the next hour, Marjorie watched through the cabin's small window as Silas Brennan worked. He climbed onto her roof in fading light, cleared the flue with tools he'd brought, replaced 2 shingles that had come loose. His breath puffed white in the cold, but he moved with steady patience of a man who'd learned most problems could be fixed if you just didn't quit. The sound of his hammer on wood was rhythmic, solid, a sound that said someone was making things right. Inside, Ruth had gotten the fire going, fed it every scrap of kindling until flames caught proper. She chattered about her chickens, about how her papa was teaching her to read, about how her mama used to make the best biscuits, but now it was just her and papa, and sometimes the biscuits burned. "Do you miss your mama?" Marjorie asked gently. Ruth nodded, solemn. "Every day. But papa says missing someone means they mattered, and that's good, even if it hurts." "Your papa's a wise man. He's real sad, though, even when he smiles." Ruth stirred the soup with exaggerated care. "Are you sad too?" Marjorie had to look away. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." "Then maybe you and Papa could be sad together. That might be better than being sad alone." The simplicity of it, the clear-eyed logic of a child who hadn't yet learned that grief was supposed to be private, made Marjorie's chest ache. When Silas came back down, his hands were black with soot and his shirt was damp with melted snow, but the chimney was drawing proper and heat was starting to fill the small space. The smell of warming wood replaced the smell of cold despair. "That should hold, boy," he said. "You got enough wood here for 2 weeks if you're careful. I'll bring more after that. Mr. Brennan, I can't possibly—" "You can pay me back when you're able. Trade work, sewing, whatever, but right now you're accepting this wood and that's final." His tone brooked to no argument. Marjorie swallowed hard. "Thank you." He nodded once, called to Ruth. "Come on, baby girl. Getting dark." As they prepared to leave, Marjorie touched the coat still wrapped around her shoulders. "Your coat. Let me keep it tonight. You can return it tomorrow when you're warm through. But you'll be cold." "I got others." A lie, probably, but said with such casual certainty she couldn't argue. They left. Marjorie stood in her warming cabin wearing a stranger's coat, eating soup a child had carried. For the first time in 6 months, she cried not from despair, but from the overwhelming strangeness of kindness. Outside, stars were beginning to show through breaking clouds, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, lonely but alive. Beatrice Harlan's parlor smelled like expensive tea and fresh-cut holly, a calculated display of Christmas refinement that made her guests feel both welcomed and judged. 6 women sat in careful circle, teacups balanced on laps, faces arranged in expressions of concern that didn't quite hide their eagerness for gossip. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, wind rattled the windows. "I'm not suggesting anything improper," Beatrice said, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone suggesting exactly that. "I'm merely observing that Mr. Brennan, a widower, a man of some standing, has involved himself quite publicly with a woman of uncertain circumstances." Mrs. Eldridge, who ran the general store, leaned forward. Her dress rustled like paper. "I heard she was wearing men's clothing under her dress, a cavalry coat." "Her dead husband's coat," said Miss Oswin, the schoolteacher, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "So she claims." Beatrice sipped her tea. The cup clinked delicately against the saucer. "But we have only her word about this supposed husband. She arrived in town 6 months ago with no references, no family, no means of support. For all we know, she could be fleeing some scandal back east." "She does have that educated way of speaking," Mrs. Eldridge mused, "like she's hiding something." "Exactly." Beatrice set down her cup with delicate precision. "And now she has her hooks in Silas Brennan, a man with a young, impressionable daughter. What kind of example does that set?" The women murmured agreement, their collective judgment building like a storm. "The question," Beatrice continued, "is what we do about it. This is a Christian community. We have standards." A knock at the door interrupted them. Beatrice's housemaid showed in Marshall Clyde Oaks, a lean man in his late 30s with a badge on his vest and tired eyes of someone who'd learned law and justice weren't but always the same thing. Ladies. He removed his hat. Snow dusted his shoulders. Mrs. Harlan said you wanted to discuss a matter of community concern. We do, Marshall. Beatrice gestured to a chair. It's regarding Mrs. Colton, the seamstress living in the old Miller cabin. We have questions about her situation. Oakes sat, accepted coffee. The cup warmed his cold, reddened hands. What kind of questions? Legal ones. She has no visible employment, no family support, no clear means of sustenance. Under territorial law, doesn't that constitute vagrancy? The marshal's face went carefully neutral. Could be interpreted that way. And vagrancy is grounds for removal from the township, is it not? In certain circumstances. He paused. You asking me to remove her? I'm asking you to investigate, Beatrice said smoothly. If she's here, legally and properly, wonderful. If not, well, we can't have transients taking advantage of our community's good nature, especially not ones who seem to be cultivating inappropriate relationships with respected citizens. Oakes took a slow sip of coffee. You're talking about Brennan. I'm talking about propriety, Marshall. Silas Brennan is free to associate with whomever he chooses, of course. But he has a daughter to think of, and Mrs. Colton's influence on that child. She trailed off meaningfully. The women nodded in unified concern. Marshall Oakes set down his coffee cup. Something in his face suggested he'd played this game before and hated it, but knew the moves anyway. Territory law is clear on vagrancy, he said finally. If she's got no visible means of support, no legitimate residence claim, no employment contract, I could make a case for removal, especially if there's community concern about her character. There is, Beatrice said firmly. The other women murmured agreement. I'll look into it. Oakes stood. But Mrs. Harlan, you should know, Brennan's got friends in this town. People who respect him. You push too hard on this, you might find more resistance than you expect. Beatrice's smile was thin and cold. Marshall, I'm not pushing anything. I'm simply ensuring our community standards are maintained. Surely you can't object to that. He couldn't, and they both knew it. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a verdict. The marshal came 3 days later, just after dawn when the cold was sharpest and hope was thinnest. Marjorie was heating water for washing when his knock rattled the cabin door. The sound of his fist on wood made her jump. Mrs. Colton, Marshal Oakes, need a word. Her hands went still over the pot. She'd done nothing wrong, but the law had rarely cared about that. She opened the door to find him standing in the snow, his face professionally expressionless, his breath puffed white between them. Ma'am, I'm here on official business. May I come in? She stepped aside. He entered, filling the small cabin with his authority and the cold he'd brought with him. Snow melted off his boots onto her floor. I'll be direct, he said. There's been complaints filed with the territorial office regarding your residency here. Specifically, questions about your means of support and legal status. The floor seemed to tilt under her feet. I don't understand. Under territorial vagrancy statutes, any person without visible means of employment, property ownership, or family sponsorship can be removed from a township if deemed a burden or threat to community welfare. He spoke like he was reading from a document. Maybe he was. Do you have employment? I'm a seamstress. I take commissions. Any contracts? Written agreements? No, but property deed? I'm renting the cabin from... She stopped. She wasn't renting. She was squatting in an abandoned building. They both knew it. Family in the territory who can vouch for you? No. Oakes nodded, like she'd confirmed exactly what he'd expected. Then by law, I can issue a removal order. You'd have 72 hours to vacate. Where would I go? The words came out as a whisper. It's December. That's not my concern, ma'am. I enforce the law, not write it. The door banged open. Silas Brennan stood there, still in his work clothes, frost in his beard, fury in his eyes. Ruth was beside him, breathing hard from running. Their boots tracked snow across the threshold. The hell you doing here, Oakes? The marshal turned, unsurprised. Official business, Brennan. Doesn't concern you. She's my neighbor. That makes it my concern. Your neighbor with no legal right to be here. There's been complaints. From Beatrice Harland, I'd wager. Oakes's silence was confirmation enough. Silas stepped fully into the cabin, putting himself between the marshal and Marjorie. Let me guess, Mrs. Harland's suddenly concerned about vagrancy law. Never cared about the three drifters sleeping in the church basement or old Jessup living in a lean-to behind the livery, but one woman she took a dislike to at the Christmas bazaar, and suddenly she's a defender of legal order. I don't write the complaints, Brennan. I just enforce them. Then don't enforce this one. Can't ignore it once it's filed. You know that. Even when it's horse shit? Watch your language in front of your daughter. Silas glanced back at Ruth, who was watching with wide, frightened eyes. He moderated his tone, but not his intensity. Clyde, we serve together. You know me. You know I don't ask favors, but I'm asking now, don't do this. The marshal looked uncomfortable for the first time. I got my orders. Orders from Beatrice Harland aren't orders. They're vengeance dressed up in law books. Might be, but they're still enforceable. Oakes moved toward the door, then stopped. He looked at Silas with something like pity. You're going to lose everything over this woman, Brennan. Your contracts, half the town council's already talking about pulling their business from you. You're standing in the community. Hell, if you keep pushing, they might even question whether you're fit to have custody of that little girl. He let the words hang in the air, heavy as stones. You sure she's worth it? The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, wind howled through bare branches. Inside, the fire popped and crackled. Silas looked at Marjorie, terrified, thin, wrapped in his coat like it was the only solid thing in her world. Then at Ruth, whose small face was set with determination she'd inherited from her mother. Then back at Oakes. Yeah, he said quietly. She is. The marshal shook his head. 72 hours, Mrs. Colton. After that, I come back with a warrant. He left. The cold rushed in behind him like judgment made manifest. Ruth ran to Marjorie and wrapped her arms around her waist. Papa won't let them take you. He promised. But Marjorie looked at Silas over Ruth's head, and in his eyes she saw the terrible weight of what his promise would cost. Everything. That evening, 3 men sat in Silas's barn while wind howled outside and lantern light threw long shadows across stacked hay. The smell of horses and leather filled the warm space. Dr. Jessup, old, bent, but sharp as the scalpels in his bag. Blacksmith Monroe, a huge man with gentle hands and a memory for every law book he'd ever read. And Silas, pacing like a caged animal. 72 hours, he said for the 3rd time. That's all we got. Territorial vagrancy law, Monroe rumbled, flipping through a battered legal volume he'd brought. Pages crackled as he turned them. It's meant to prevent camps of transients, not drive out widows in December. But Beatrice knows how to use it. Can it be challenged? Jessup asked. In court, sure. Next session's in March. She'll be long gone by then. Monroe paused. Or dead. Silas slammed his fist against a support beam, making the barn rattle. Dust sifted down from the rafters. Ruth, who was supposed to be in the house, peeked through a crack in the barn door. No one told her to leave. There's got to be something, Silas said. Some way to make this right. Monroe kept reading, his finger tracing lines of dense legal text. Sponsorship, he muttered. Family sponsorship exempts from vagrancy provisions, but she's got no family here. Employment contract, Jessup offered. Documented employment with a local business gives residency rights. She's a seamstress working out of her cabin. No formal business, no contracts. Then we make one, Silas said. Beatrice will see through that. She'll claim it's fraudulent, file another complaint. The men sat in frustrated silence. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the darkness, a shutter banged loose, rhythmic, relentless. Monroe turned another page, stopped, read carefully, then again, slower. His finger paused mid-line. What? Silas demanded. Frontier Winter Mercy Clause, Monroe said slowly. Subsection D of the Territorial Code. No person shall be compelled to travel or relocate during months of December through February if such travel would reasonably endanger life, limb, or health due to inclement weather conditions. Jessup leaned forward. That would block the removal order. For 3 months. Buys us time till spring. Time for what? Silas asked. The 3 men looked at each other. Something passed between them, an understanding that some problems couldn't be solved, only outlasted. Time to find a permanent solution, Monroe said. Time to build her credibility in town. Time to make Beatrice's vendetta look like what it is. Or time for her to marry someone local, Jessup added quietly. That would end the vagrancy question permanently. Silas went very still. The lantern flame flickered in a draft. I ain't suggesting, Jessup started. I know what you're suggesting. Silas's voice was flat. And I'll consider it. But right now, we focus on keeping her here through winter. Can you file the Mercy Clause petition? Monroe nodded. I can have it to Oakes tomorrow. He'll have to honor it. It's territorial law, supersedes local complaints. Then do it. Silas looked toward the house, where lamplight glowed in the kitchen window. Marjorie was in there with Ruth, the two of them teaching each other things, Ruth showing Marjorie how to bank a fire proper, Marjorie showing Ruth how to make stitches small and even. Two people trying to survive winter by sharing what little warmth they had. Marjorie came to his house after dark, when temperature had dropped so low that breathing hurt. She carried the coat folded carefully in her arms, cleaned and mended where the seam had started to fray. The smell of lye soap clung to the fabric. Silas opened the door to find her standing there like an apology made flesh. I brought your coat back, she said. I washed it, mended it. Keep it. Mr. Brennan, I can't. You need it more than I do. But you'll freeze. Got others. He stepped aside. Come in before you turn to ice out there. She hesitated, then entered. The house was warm, lived in, full of small details that made a place a home rather than just shelter. Ruth was asleep on the sofa, curled under a quilt, her face peaceful in lamplight. Her breath came soft and even. She fell asleep waiting for you to come by, Silas said quietly. Wanted to show you the stitching she practiced. Marjorie's throat tightened. She's a sweet child. She is. Gets that from her mother. They stood in awkward silence, the coat between them like a question neither knew how to ask. The clock on the mantel ticked, steady, patient. Mr. Brennan, Silas, if you're going to keep showing up at my door after dark, might as well use my given name. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Silas, then. And I'm Marjorie. I know. Another silence. Less awkward this time. This coat, she said finally, running her hand over the sheepskin. It's fine work. Your wife made it? He nodded. Last winter, before she passed. Told me a man should have something warm enough to face the cold and kind enough to share if someone needed it more. He paused. Reckon she meant you. She couldn't have known I'd exist. Martha had a way of knowing things before they happened, like she could see around corners. His voice went soft. She told me, right before the end, don't let yourself freeze just because I'm gone. Keep warm, Silas. The world's too cold already. Marjorie's eyes stung. My Thomas said something similar. He said, You're stronger than you think, Margie. When I'm gone, don't you dare quit. You survive. You hear me? You survive, and you make something good out of this life. And are you, Silas asked gently, making something good? She looked down at the coat in her arms. I'm trying. Some days trying's all I got. Some days, trying's enough. They stood there in the warm kitchen, two people carrying the weight of promises made to the dead, trying to figure out how to keep living for the living. Finally, Silas took the coat from her hands and draped it back over her shoulders. The weight of it settled familiar on her frame. Keep it, he said firmly. Wear it till spring, till you don't need it anymore. That's what it's for. She wanted to argue, but the warmth seeping into her bones made resistance impossible. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. Thank Martha. She's the one who saw this coming. Outside, the temperature dropped another 5 degrees, and the stars burned cold and clear in a moonless sky. Blacksmith Monroe walked into the marshal's office at 8 the next morning with a document that would change the shape of winter. Marshal Oakes looked up from his coffee, saw the paper, and sighed. Steam rose from his cup, dissipating in the cold office air. Don't do this, Monroe. Ain't doing anything but filing a legal petition. Frontier Winter Mercy Clause, subsection D. You know it as well as I do. Oakes took the document, read it with careful attention of a man who knew loopholes could bite both ways. His face went carefully neutral. Outside, someone's horse whinnied, the sound sharp in morning quiet. This blocks the removal order, he said finally. For 3 months, till spring. Beatrice ain't gonna like it. Don't care what Beatrice likes. Care about what the law says. Oakes set down the paper and looked at Monroe with tired eyes. You know what you're doing? You're painting a target on Brennan, on yourself, on anyone who stands with this woman. Beatrice Harlan don't lose gracefully. Notice that about her. She'll find another way, always does. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. Monroe turned to leave, then paused. Clyde, you and Brennan served together. You owe him better than this. Something flickered across the marshal's face. Guilt, maybe? Or the memory of a time when honor had meant more than paychecks. I know, he said quietly, but I got a job to do. Then do it right. Monroe left. Oakes sat alone in his office, staring at the petition that would buy Marjorie Colton 3 months of safety and cost him God knew what in consequences. He stamped it approved because the law was clear and he wasn't quite corrupt enough to ignore it outright. The sound of the stamp echoed in the empty room. 2 hours later, Beatrice Harlan stood in that same office, reading that same document, her face transforming from shock to fury to cold, calculated rage. The paper trembled slightly in her gloved hands. This is a delaying tactic, she said. It's the law, ma'am. It's manipulation of the law. She's using winter as a shield. That's what the clause is for, to prevent people freezing to death for the sake of legal niceties. Beatrice set down the paper with exaggerated care. Marshal, I appreciate that you have statutory obligations, but surely you understand this woman represents a moral threat to our community that goes beyond mere residency questions. Meaning? Meaning she has cultivated an inappropriate relationship with Silas Brennan, a widower, a man with a young, impressionable daughter. They are living in what can only be described as a compromising proximity. They ain't living together. Yet. But he visits her cabin after dark. She's been seen at his home. And we all saw how publicly he defended her at the bazaar. Beatrice's voice dropped to a confidential whisper. The smell of her perfume, lavender and something sharper, filled the small space. Marshal, I'm not suggesting anything has occurred, but the appearance of impropriety is, in its way, as damaging as the act itself. For the child's sake, if nothing else, something must be done. Oakes felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was how it started. The insinuations, the concerned whispers, the gradual poisoning of reputation until even innocent actions looked suspicious. What are you suggesting? Beatrice smiled. It was the smile of a woman who'd just found a new weapon. If we cannot remove her legally, we remove her socially. A woman's reputation is more fragile than any law, Marshal. All it takes is the right words in the right ears, and she'll leave on her own, to protect herself, to protect him. She paused. To protect that innocent little girl. Oakes wanted to argue, wanted to throw her out of his office, wanted to ride to Brennan's ranch and warn him what was coming, but he didn't. Because Beatrice Harlan had reminded him, without saying it directly, that she knew about the money he'd borrowed from the bank. The money he'd lost in a bad cattle deal. The money he was supposed to be repaying, but couldn't. The money her husband controlled. I'll keep an eye on the situation, he said finally, hating himself. I'm sure you will. Beatrice collected her gloves. Good day, Marshal. She left, already planning the whispers that would spread like disease through the town's social circles. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a trap snapping shut. Ruth came home from school early, her face red from more than cold. Silas was mending fence when he saw her running up the road, her little body shaking with sobs. The sound of her crying carried across the frozen field. He dropped the hammer and ran to meet her. Baby girl, what happened? She couldn't speak at first, just buried her face in his chest and cried with the particular intensity of a child who'd learned cruelty could come from other children's mouths. Her small hands clutched his shirt. Ruth, talk to me. They said, her voice broke, they said you're going to marry the bad lady, and I'm going to be a bastard sister, and Mama would be ashamed of you, and... The words dissolved into sobbing. Silas's hands clenched into fists. Who said that? Emma Harland and Timothy Oakes, and Miss Oswin didn't stop them. She just looked away. He held his daughter tight, feeling rage build like a head of steam. Not at the children, they were just parroting what they'd heard at home, but at the adults who'd used children as weapons, who'd poisoned innocent minds with their own venom. Listen to me. He pulled back to look Ruth in the eyes. Your mama would be proud of me. Proud of you. Proud that we're helping someone who needs it. Don't you ever doubt that. But they said, I don't care what they said. People say a lot of things when they're scared or small or just plain mean. Don't make it true. He took her inside, got her settled with warm milk, then rode directly to the schoolhouse. His horse's hooves struck frozen ground like hammers. Miss Oswin was cleaning slates when he walked in. The smell of chalk dust hung in the air. The look on his face made her step back. "Mr. Brennan, you let children bully my daughter in your classroom while you watched. I didn't realize. You realized fine. You just didn't care." He stepped closer, not threatening but immovable. "My Ruth's got enough to carry without your students calling her names because you're too coward to stop them. That ends now, today, or I'll be speaking to the school board about a teacher who can't maintain basic decency in her classroom." Miss Oswin's face flushed. "The things being said about you and Mrs. Colton ain't none of your business, and sure as hell ain't something you should be letting children weaponize." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You used to be kind, Emily, before Beatrice got her hooks in you. Might want to remember what that felt like." He left her standing there, shamefaced and silent. That evening, Dr. Jessup stopped by Silas's ranch with information he'd been debating whether to share. His old horse stood steaming in the cold yard. "You should know," he said without preamble. "Beatrice's husband lost their savings. Gambling debts down in Denver. They're 3 months behind on their mortgage. The bank's about to foreclose on their property." Silas absorbed this. "How do you know?" "Her husband came to me for laudanum, to help him sleep," he said, but he was sweating too much for it to just be insomnia. Looked like a man under pressure. Jessup paused. "I shouldn't be telling you this, patient confidence and all, but that woman's trying to destroy an innocent widow, and I figure you should know why." "She's protecting herself," Silas said slowly. "If she can't pay the mortgage, she loses status, loses standing, so she finds someone lower to kick down on, makes herself feel like she's still on top. That's about the size of it." Silas looked out at the darkening horizon, wheels turning. "If the bank's about to foreclose, then she's vulnerable. For the first time in her life, Beatrice Harlan's vulnerable. Might make her desperate." Jessup paused. "Might also make her weak." In the west, the sun was setting. Clouds on the horizon glowed red and gold like fire burning low. The town square, on Saturday morning, was the closest thing to neutral ground they had. People gathered for market, for gossip, for the basic commerce of small-town life. The smell of fresh bread mixed with horse manure and cold air. Silas waited until Beatrice arrived in her carriage, still keeping up appearance despite the financial rot beneath, then stepped directly into her path. "Mrs. Harland, a word." She looked at him with theatrical surprise. "Mr. Brennan, how unexpected." "I'll be brief. Stop spreading lies about Marjorie Colton. Stop poisoning children against my family. Stop this vendetta before it costs you more than you can afford to lose." People stopped to watch. Market conversations died. This was the kind of confrontation that would be discussed for months. The sound of a dropped coin rolling across frozen ground was loud in sudden quiet. Beatrice's smile was poisonous. "I have no idea what you mean. I've merely expressed concern about a questionable situation." "Your concern ain't about morality. It's about control, and you're losing control, ain't you? Your husband gambled away your savings. The bank's 3 months from foreclosing. You're trying to tear down someone else so folks don't notice you're falling yourself." Her face went white, then red. Around them, gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. "How dare you, oh." "I dare because you made it my business when you came after Marjorie, when you sent children home with poison in their mouths, when you tried to use the law like a weapon." He stepped closer, voice dropping but still audible. "You want to destroy her because she reminds you of what you're about to become, someone with nothing, depending on charity, and that terrifies you." "You sanctimonious," she caught herself, remembering the crowd. "This is not about my personal circumstances, which are none of your concern, and certainly not a subject for public discussion. This is about you harboring a woman of questionable character. She's a widow trying to survive. She's a seductress who's ensnared you. She's done nothing but accept help when it was offered." "Help?" Beatrice's laugh was sharp. "Is that what they're calling it now? You spend your evenings at her cabin. She visits your home after dark. She's worn your coat for weeks. And we're supposed to believe nothing untoward is happening." Marjorie appeared at the edge of the crowd, drawn by raised voices. Her face went pale when she saw what was happening. She wore Silas's coat still, and the sight of it seemed to fuel Beatrice's rage. Silas saw her and felt something solidify in his chest, a decision he'd been circling around for days, finally landing with certainty. "You're right," he said clearly. Something is happening. I'm helping a neighbor survive winter. I'm teaching my daughter that kindness matters more than reputation. And I'm showing this town what Christian charity looks like when it ain't just words in a church pew. You're showing this town moral corruption, Beatrice hissed. And if you continue down this path, I will make it my personal mission to see that you lose everything. Your business contracts, your standing, perhaps even custody of that child, if she's being raised in such a morally compromised environment. The crowd went silent. Someone's breath caught audibly. Silas looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Then I reckon we're at war, Mrs. Harland. And I should warn you, I've been to war before. I know how it ends for people who fight dirty." Beatrice's voice rang across the square, pitched to Carrie. "Then let it be known, Silas Brennan is living in sin with a vagrant woman, and I will not rest until this town chooses between Christian decency and moral corruption. Choose wisely, friends. Choose wisely." She swept away, leaving Silas standing in the square with 200 eyes on him and the weight of his choice settling like snow. The smell of her perfume lingered in the cold air, cloying, artificial. They sat across from each other at Silas's kitchen table that evening, the weight of what was coming pressing down like the low clouds that promised more snow. Ruth was supposed to be asleep upstairs, but Silas knew she was sitting on the steps, listening. He could hear the creak of the fourth stair where she always positioned herself. She had her mother's habit of eavesdropping on important conversations. "I'm leaving," Marjorie said. "It's the only way to end this. I'll go west, find work in a bigger town where—" "You'll die." Silas's voice was flat. "It's December. You got no money, no supplies, no horse. You'd last maybe 3 days. Then I'll wait till spring." "Beatrice won't wait till spring. She'll find a way to force you out before then. New charges, new complaints. She's got the money and the connections to make your life hell indefinitely." Marjorie's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. "Then what do you suggest? I can't keep accepting your help. It's destroying you." "Not destroyed yet. Your daughter's being bullied. Your business is threatened. The whole town's watching you like—" "I don't care what the town thinks." "Well, I do." The words burst out of her, raw and desperate. "I care that a good man is being punished for basic human decency. I care that a little girl is crying because of me. I care that you're losing everything because I was stupid enough to tear my dress in public. Stop." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close. "None of this is your fault. You didn't ask for cruelty. You didn't create Beatrice's problems. You just existed, and she chose to use you as a weapon against her own fear. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. What matters is making it stop." "There's a way." He took a breath. "Legal way. Permanent way." She looked at him, hope and dread mixing in her eyes. "Marry me," he said. The words hung in the air between them. The fire popped and crackled. Outside, wind moaned around the eaves. "Not for love," he continued quickly. "Not for romance or any of that. A practical marriage. Legal protection. You'd have my name, my home, legal standing that Beatrice couldn't touch. Ruth would have, well, she'd have what she's been wanting anyway. Someone to help raise her." "Silas, I can't." "Yes, you can. We both can. It's a business arrangement. A legal solution to a legal problem." "But Martha's gone." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. "She's been gone 8 years, and I've been frozen in place just as long. Maybe it's time to thaw out, for both of us." He pulled Martha's wedding ring from his pocket, simple gold, worn smooth by years of wear, and set it on the table between them. It caught the lamplight, glowing warm against dark wood. "It's not love," he repeated. "It's shelter. From the cold, from Beatrice, from the law. You'd be safe, Ruth would be happy, and I'd—" He paused. "I'd be doing what I should have done years ago, choosing life over grief." Marjorie stared at the ring. Tears tracked down her face. She could see the wear pattern where Martha's finger had rested for 12 years, could almost feel the love that had polished those tiny grooves into the metal. "I need to think," she whispered. "Fair enough, but think fast. Beatrice ain't known for patience." Upstairs, Ruth pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. But her eyes were shining in the darkness, and she was smiling. The town hall was packed beyond capacity on Christmas Eve, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, breath fogging in the cold air because the stove couldn't keep up with the crowd. The smell of wet wool and unwashed bodies mixed with pine boughs someone had hung for decoration. Everyone had come. This was the kind of showdown people would talk about for decades. Beatrice stood at the front, dressed in her finest black silk, playing the role of concerned citizen with practiced precision. Her voice carried easily across the crowded room. "Friends," she began, "we gather tonight to address a matter that affects the moral foundation of our community. Mr. Silas Brennan, a man we've known and respected, has involved himself in a situation that demands our attention." She detailed the concerns. Marjorie's unknown origins, the questionable circumstances of her widowhood, the improper intimacy of her relationship with Silas, the negative influence on impressionable children. "I take no pleasure in this," Beatrice said and almost sounded sincere. "But we must choose what kind of community we wish to be. One that upholds standards of decency or one that allows irregularities to flourish unchecked." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but not everyone. Blacksmith Monroe stood against the back wall, arms crossed. Dr. Jessup sat near the front, face impassive. A few others, the blacksmith's wife, old Mrs. Patterson, the livery owner, watched with more sympathy than judgment. The sound of boots shuffling on wood floor filled the pauses in Beatrice's speech. "Does anyone wish to speak in Mr. Brennan's defense?" Beatrice asked, with the tone of someone who didn't expect an answer. Silas stood. The room went silent. He walked to the front, Ruth holding his hand, and turned to face the assembly. Marjorie sat near the side door, wrapped in his coat, her face pale but set with determination. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded room. "I do," Silas said quietly. "I wish to speak." Beatrice stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. "You all know me," Silas began. "Knew me before the war. Knew my wife Martha, knew how she died, knew the years I spent after, just trying to keep my daughter fed and my land worked and my heart from freezing solid." People nodded. They did know. They'd watched him grieve for 8 winters. "Mrs. Harlan's right about one thing. I have been helping Marjorie Colton. I brought her firewood, fixed her chimney, gave her my coat when she was freezing. And you know what? I'd do it again. I'd do it 100 times because that's what Martha would have wanted. That's what being human means." "Mr. Brennan," Beatrice interjected, "no one questions your charitable impulses. But the nature of your relationship has gone beyond. I'm going to marry her." The announcement hit like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted. People turned to each other in shock. The sound was like a flock of startled birds taking flight. Marjorie's hand flew to her mouth. Silas continued, his voice steady. "Tomorrow, Christmas morning, in this hall, if anyone here is willing to officiate, a legal marriage, proper and witnessed, Mrs. Colton will have my name, my protection, and my home. Ruth will have what she's been asking for, someone to help me raise her, and this town will have one less thing to gossip about." Beatrice's face had gone white. "You can't—" "I can. Already filed the intention with the territorial office. Monroe has the paperwork." The blacksmith stepped forward, holding a document folder. "All legal. Marriage by declaration, witnessed and recorded. Can't be challenged once it's done." "This is a sham." Beatrice's voice rose, losing its careful modulation. "A legal trick to circumvent the vagrancy laws." "It's a marriage," Silas said. "Same as any other. And once it's done, Marjorie becomes a legal resident with full territorial rights. Can't be removed, can't be challenged, can't be run out of town by people with nothing better to do than destroy others." Marshall Oakes stood slowly. Everyone turned to look at him. The scrape of his chair against the floor was loud. "Brennan's right," he said quietly. "Legal marriage ends the residency question. I'd have no grounds to pursue removal." He paused, then added, "And for what it's worth, I think he's doing the right thing." Beatrice spun on him. "You're supposed to enforce the law." "I am, and the law says a married woman with a resident husband can't be declared vagrant." He looked at Silas. "You got someone to officiate?" "I will," said Dr. Jessup, standing. "I'm a registered minister. Been a while since I performed a ceremony, but I remember the words." One by one, others stood. Monroe, Mrs. Patterson, the livery owner, not everyone, not even half, but enough to show that the town wasn't unified in its cruelty. The sound of their standing was like a door opening, creaking, hesitant, but opening nonetheless. Beatrice stood trembling with rage, her careful plan unraveling. "Fine," she hissed. "Marry her, but know this. You'll be pariahs. Both of you. Outcasts. I'll make certain of it." "Ma'am," Silas said gently, "I've been an outcast since Martha died. Got used to it. Might even prefer it to whatever you call community." He held out his hand to Marjorie. She stood, walked across the room through the crowd that parted like a river around Stone, and took his hand. Her fingers were cold in his, but steady. Christmas morning broke cold and clear, the kind of crystalline winter day that made everything look possible. The town hall had been swept clean, decorated with pine boughs and candles someone, probably Mrs. Patterson, had brought before dawn. The smell of pine and beeswax filled the air. Silas arrived in his best shirt, Ruth in her Sunday dress, both of them carrying the weight of what they were about to do. Marjorie was already there, wearing a dress someone had lent her, her hair pinned up, still wrapped in Silas's coat because the hall wasn't warm enough yet. About 30 people had come. Not the whole town, but enough. Enough to make it real, enough to witness, enough to say later that they'd been there when Silas Brennan chose life over grief. Dr. Jessup stood at the front, Bible in hand, looking more like a physician about to perform surgery than a minister about to perform a wedding. Maybe there wasn't much difference. "We gather," he began simply, "to witness a covenant between Silas Brennan and Marjorie Colton. In the eyes of God, the territory, and this community." The words were traditional, worn smooth by centuries of use. Silas and Marjorie stood facing each other, hands joined, both trembling slightly but standing firm. Outside, a bird sang, impossibly early, impossibly hopeful. "Silas, do you take this woman?" "I do." "Marjorie, do you take this man?" "I do." No flowery speeches, no promises of passionate love. Just two people agreeing to share the burden of survival, to build shelter against the cold, to try, just try, to be less alone. Then Ruth stepped forward, and in her hands was something Silas hadn't seen in 8 years. Martha's wedding shawl, the blue one with silver threads that caught light like stars. The smell of cedar and lavender rose from the carefully folded fabric. "Papa," Ruth said solemnly, "Mama told me before she died that families grow. That's what you said, remember? And I think Miss Marjorie, Mrs. Brennan now, I think she's supposed to have this." She held out the shawl. Marjorie's eyes filled with tears. "Ruth, I can't." "Mama would want you to," Ruth insisted. "She told me that love doesn't run out, you just keep making more." Silas knelt beside his daughter, vision blurring. "You sure, baby girl?" "I'm sure. Mama said to give it to the next mama when the time came. This is the time." She draped the shawl around Marjorie's shoulders, and the gesture was so perfectly Ruth, so perfectly Martha, that Silas had to look away for a moment to compose himself. Several people in the small crowd wiped their eyes. Silas pulled Martha's wedding ring from his pocket, the simple gold band he'd been carrying for days, waiting for this moment. It gleamed in the candlelight. "This was my first wife's," he said quietly, holding it up. "She wore it for 12 years, till the day she died. And before that, it was her mother's. 3 generations of love in this little piece of gold." He looked at Marjorie. "It don't mean you're replacing Martha. It means you're continuing what she started, building family, making warmth against the cold, choosing kindness when the world chooses cruelty." He slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if Martha had somehow known, had somehow planned for this moment even from beyond death. "By the authority vested in me," Jessup said, voice thick, "I pronounce you husband and wife. May you find warmth together." They kissed briefly, a promise more than a passion, and Ruth threw her arms around both of them. Somewhere outside the window, impossibly early, the first robin of an approaching spring began to sing. In the back of the hall, Marshall Oakes nodded once and left quietly. Beatrice Harland watched from across the street, wrapped in her own expensive coat, alone in her carriage. She saw the moment of union, saw the community gathered in witness, saw her power dissolve like snow in sudden sun. She drove away, and no one noticed her leaving. The sound of her carriage wheels faded into the distance. January came and went with the kind of cold that tested everything. But Silas's house stayed warm, and the people inside it warmer. Marjorie moved into the ranch, not as a guest, but as family. Ruth showed her where Martha used to keep the preserves, how to work the temperamental stove, which chickens laid best. They fell into rhythms, Marjorie sewing by the window, Silas working the land, Ruth moving between them like a bridge connecting two shores. The smell of bread baking became regular again. The sound of laughter echoed in rooms that had been silent too long. By February, something unexpected happened. Women started coming to the house. Not all of them, not even most, but enough. Mrs. Patterson first. "I need a dress mended," she said gruffly. "Heard you do good work." Then Mrs. Monroe. My daughter's getting married in spring. Could you make her something special? Then others, one by one, bringing their sewing and their shame and their quiet apologies disguised as business. The jingle of coins in Marjorie's jar grew louder with each passing week. Marjorie took their work. She didn't make them grovel, didn't demand explicit contrition, just measured them for hems and talked about weather and slowly, gradually, wove herself into the fabric of the community through thread and patience. By March, she had enough work to open a small shop in town, a room in the back of Monroe's smithy, where the rent was fair and the neighbors were friendly. She hung a simple sign, Brennan Seamstress and Tailoring, honest work, honest prices. The smell of hot metal from the smithy mixed with the smell of sizing and fabric. It smelled like possibility. Ruth helped after school, threading needles and organizing fabric scraps and chattering about her day while Marjorie worked. Miss Oswin said she's sorry, Ruth mentioned one afternoon, carefully winding thread onto a spool. Did she? Said she should have been braver. Said she was scared of being different, so she went along with the mean people. Marjorie set down her needle. What did you tell her? Told her Papa says it's never too late to start being brave. Ruth looked up with serious eyes. Is that true? Yes, baby, that's true. Beatrice Harlan left town in early February without ceremony or announcement. Just a closed carriage in the pre-dawn cold, heading east toward relatives who might or might not take her in. The sound of wheels on frozen ground faded into silence. Her house was foreclosed within the week, bank notice on the door, windows dark, garden already starting to grow wild. By late February, snow had drifted against the locked door, and it looked like no one had ever lived there at all. By March, people spoke her name with effort, the way you remember someone from a bad dream, uncomfortable, imprecise, already fading. Marshall Oakes resigned his position 2 weeks after the wedding, took a job on Silas's ranch, mucking stalls and mending fences and slowly learning what it felt like to do honest work again. He didn't talk much, but sometimes he'd help Ruth with her arithmetic, and that seemed like penance enough. The sound of his hammer on fence posts became as regular as the sunrise. Winter started to break in late March. Ice on the creek groaned and cracked, loud reports that echoed across the valley like rifle shots. Snow receded to reveal brown grass that would soon turn green. The first robins returned, then the meadowlarks. Then the season turned fully, and spring arrived like a gift no one had dared hope for. The smell of thawing earth replaced the smell of wood smoke. The sound of running water replaced the sound of wind. One afternoon in early April, Marjorie stood in the doorway of the ranch house watching Silas and Ruth plant the kitchen garden. The soil was dark and rich, warm enough now to accept seeds. Ruth was asking 100 questions about what would grow and when, and Silas was answering each one with patient detail. Marjorie touched her belly, still flat, but not for much longer. She'd tell them tonight, tell them that by harvest time there would be 4 of them instead of 3. The coat and the shawl hung together in the mudroom, side by side on wooden pegs. She'd offered several times to put them away, to store them properly, but Silas always said no, said they belonged right there, where they could remind everyone who passed what kindness looked like when it was real. Ruth looked up from the garden and waved. Marjorie waved back. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that might have been hope, or maybe it was just spring. Sometimes they were the same thing. 47 winters have come and gone since that December, and I'm still here to count them. That's more than some folks get, more than I probably deserved. Marjorie and I, we made a good match. Not the kind of love songs get written about. Wasn't passion that kept us together. Wasn't romance. It was something quieter. We built a life from shared mornings and split firewood, and the kind of trust that comes from surviving winter together. The smell of her bread baking, the sound of her humming while she sewed, the way her hand found mine on cold nights without either of us saying a word. Ruth grew up with 2 mothers, one in memory, one in presence. Neither replaced the other. They just made her stronger, the way 2 threads braided together make rope that won't break under weight. We had 3 more children after that first winter. Each one taught us something new about love, about family, about how hearts stretch to hold more than you think possible. The coat, Martha's coat, the one I gave to Marjorie that first day, we kept it. Hangs in our mudroom even now, next to the shawl Ruth gave away and got back when her own babies came. They're artifacts now, relics of a winter when everything could have gone wrong but somehow went right. People ask me sometimes, usually the young ones, the ones who still think life's supposed to be simple, they ask why I did it, why I risked everything for a woman I barely knew. And I tell them what I learned that December. Dignity ain't something you're born with or something you can buy. It's something you choose to give, even when, especially when, the world's trying to take it away. And the strange miracle of dignity is this: when you give it to someone else, you get to keep it too. It multiplies. Like love, like family, like spring after a hard winter, the cold will always come back. That's the nature of the world. But so will the thaw, if you're patient, if you're kind, if you build enough warmth with other people to make it through the dark months. I'm an old man now. The smell of spring soil still reminds me of that first garden Marjorie and Ruth planted together. The sound of robins still makes me think of a Christmas morning when everything changed. That December, the one where a dress tore and a coat was shared and a family grew from frozen ground, that's the winter that taught me everything worth knowing. Some things are stronger than law, some things are warmer than fire, and dignity once given freely can't be taken back by cruel tongues or cold hearts or all the winters the world can throw at you. It stays. It endures. Like love, like family, like spring,